everybody, welcome to Drive Thru Review 701. Today we're going to take a look at Lost Ruins of Arnak. This is a new game coming out from Czech Games Edition. It plays 1 to 4 players, and it's one of those kind of combo Euro style games. So it's got a lot of deck building concepts, worker placement, set collection, all that kind of stuff. What players are doing is going out and exploring this kind of fictional fantasy lost civilization, and then getting artifacts, encountering monsters, that kind of stuff, doing research on some of the discoveries that they make, and they get items and all kinds of other things like that. So let's jump down and take a look at it, and I'll tell you what I think. So as I said, Lost Ruins of Arnak is very much a fictional lost civilization. It's got flavors of Indiana Jones, of Tomb Raider, of Uncharted, of any of these kind of fantasy archaeological types of vibes. And as you can see, the game is very well illustrated, and the board itself and all the cards and locations and everything are also very well illustrated. And the main board's basically made up of 2 boards. It's actually quite tall and kind of unwieldy if you were to lay it out in this direction. So the rules actually tell you to kind of lay it on its side and have players kind of sit on either side of it to better access all the various different tracks and worker placement spaces and so on. Now each player also gets their own little player board, like a little camp. You get a couple of workers, a little deck of cards, you can see that on the left there, and then places to put idols and little helper tokens, any kind of goods that you might collect over the course of the game. And there's really just 2 principal style of actions that you're going to do in this game. One, you're going to put one of your 2 workers out onto the board, send them out on an expedition or to go gather resources or something like that. Or you're going to play actions through cards that you acquire in the game. So here's some of the starting cards that you can see that you start with in the game. For example, this card here called Funding. These cards work in a couple different ways. First of all, you can play them as a free action. You can see the lightning bolt symbol next to the gold piece in the middle of the card. You can play as many free actions as you want on your turn. And so you can just do that in addition to some other action. But you can also use the upper left hand symbol here on the card here. It shows a little buggy or a little car, and that allows you to kind of do travel. So you can use these cards in a few different ways. Now here's an example of an item card that you might get later on in the game. This you can play, but it costs you your whole action. You see there's no lightning bolt on here. So this one you could either play for the action in the middle, which is to draw 2 cards, or you could use it into a travel action. This one actually provides you 2 cars. And on the bottom left you can see the cost. It costs you 4 gold pieces. On the bottom right you can see it gives you 1 victory point at the end of the game. So let's take a look at the main board and look at how it's kind of broken down. Here you have a couple of spaces at the bottom of the board, and these are already discovered sites that you can go and send your worker to dig at, and this is where you can collect some of the basic resources in the game. As we move up the board, you start to find new sites that you have to actually discover first, probably encounter a monster, and then also sort of unlock that space for later digs. And then at the top, you've got kind of this marketplace of cards. This is where you add new cards to your deck. And there'll actually be 2 types of cards here, artifacts and items, which I'll talk about in just a minute. And then along the right-hand side of this board is this research track. So you kind of be moving up this track, basically using some of the items that you get out of the digs, out of the exploration, and then furthering your research. But both of these will kind of tie into each other. Exploring and digging and researching, we're going to tie that in tightly together. Now at the bottom of the board is actually a second board. You can just kind of tap this up and tuck it against the bottom of the board, but this is just places for resources and various tiles to go. You don't actually have to use this if you've got a smaller table, but it's there if you want to kind of better organize your components. So let's take a look at a quick example of going to a dig site. So here you can see a site over here just off to the right where you can get 2 of these time tokens. You can take and put your worker there, and then you can collect those 2 time tokens, which you're going to make use of later in the game. And the time tokens are arguably probably the most crucial resource that you can use, because they're used in so many different ways in this game. But let's look at a more complete, slightly more complex example of how you're going to use these workers and how you actually have to pay for their travel as well. So in the case of exploring a site, you can see here this little icon set at the bottom. You've got to use 3 time tokens to get out and actually explore one of these sites above here, and then eventually be able to go and dig at it too. So for example, let's look at this spot here. Now if you wanted to send a worker here to explore, there's a few things you got to do. First off, you've got to pay a card and use the ship resource. And we've got to, in this case, pay the 3 time because we've got to now explore this. Once you explore it, you don't have to pay the time again to go dig at this spot, but you will have to use a boat symbol to actually get there still. And then of course you put your worker out. And once your worker's there, when you're exploring, you're going to get to collect this idle token, which you'll take, and then you'll put out a random site tile, in this case, which you can see here. This will immediately give you a reward, and this will be the reward that you get whenever you or even your opponents return to the site to do a dig. So in this case, you'll see you get a fear card, a time token, and a ruby token. And when you first explore a site, you're going to put this guardian tile, which is usually just a monster. And that tile is going to sit there. And then as an action, if you arrive here on this turn or a later turn and come back to it, you can spend the icons, in this case a boot travel icon, a little wooden scroll tablet, and then an arrow. And then you can defeat that monster and you get its special ability. Now, if you end your turn with a worker on a tile with a guardian, when you pull your workers back at the end of the turn, you are going to get a fear card. Now, I mentioned these before. These fear cards are going to go into your deck. They're worth -1 point at the end of the game, but they're not entirely useless because they will give you a boot travel icon. And you actually start with 2 of these in your deck. But they're easily, obviously, the worst cards in the game to have in your deck. It's worth noting, here's an example on the player aid. You can always spend 2 coins to basically convert that into an airplane. And an airplane, you can look at the chart here, you can convert into anything below it, and like a car and a ship can convert into a boot and so on. So you can always kind of spend higher than you need, and always, if you don't have any icons or cards available, spend the 2 coins. Now, rolling back just a little bit, when you take that idol off of the board when you initially discover a site, you're going to get that, and you're going to get a special ability that you can use. So in this case, it's going to allow you to actually remove a card from your deck. So you might remove a fear card that you've got, or one that you started with. Other icons will give you, different resources and so on. And you can see once you take the idol, you get whatever the resource effect is, you flip it over, it's going to be worth 3 points at the end of the game. But you've also got these 4 slots at the top of your board where you can move as a free action and activate one of the resource gatherings there on the left. So I can move this one up here, covering up the 1 point space, and I can do one of these 5 things: convert a gold to a ruby, get an arrowhead, get 2 tablets, get a gold and a time token, or draw a card. So I can do any of those any point on my turn. But you've only got 4 slots here, and the points that you're covering up are points that you're going to lose at the end of the game. Now, as I said, you can actually defeat the guardian. So in this case, if we spent the boot, tablet, and arrow, we'll take the guardian tile off of there, and then that tile will be free of a guardian, so everybody can go there and visit without fear of getting a fear card. And you got this, and you're going to place this in front of you. Now, at any point on a later turn, I can flip that over and use the effect in the upper right hand corner. In this case, it will be to actually remove a card from my deck. It could be a resource, it could be a number of things. It could even be a travel icon. And once I do that, I'll flip it over, and it's going to be worth 5 points at the end of the game. The next thing we'll talk about here is this research track. You can see here along the bottom. And so you can take an action, you just take this action without playing any cards or placing any workers, and start to move up your tokens. You can see you've got a spyglass token as well as this little book token here. You're going to spend the resources to move up the level. So we're going to spend, in this case, a time token and an arrow and start to move up. So as you move up, you might start to collect different tiles that have been laid out at the beginning of the game and get those bonuses. But it's worth noting that you can't move your book beyond where your spyglass is. And so you might move your spyglass up a couple, or then move your book up behind it. But as you move up, in addition to collecting any tiles that were there and getting the bonuses out of there, you're going to get different rewards based on the piece that's there. So in this case, you can see once I move the spyglass up to this row, I'll get a gold coin. Once I move my book up here, I'll actually get a helper. And there's going to be 3 stacks of randomly shuffled up helpers, and you just take one of these, and you can actually, as you move up further, start to upgrade these. You've got space on your board for 2 of the helpers. So this one here in the middle, you can see, you can sort of tap it, and it will get you, for a free action, another time token. But once I upgrade it, once I tap it, I can get 2 time tokens. And there's a variety of these helpers that reward different resources and actions that you can do, and they're all free actions. Now, once you get to the top of the research track, it's kind of a race here. So the first one to get their spyglass up there will move into the 23 point slot, and the next one will go to the 21 point slot. And then once you're there, once you take a research action, you can actually spend the resources you see above there to get all those bonus tiles. So how this works is, if you want that left hand 2 point bonus tile, you'll spend a gold coin and 2 tablets, and you'll get that. But if you want one of the 6 point ones, you've got to kind of combine the cost. So if I want the left hand 6 point tile, I'll spend the gold, 2 tablets, and a ruby. and I will get that one on the left. Or if I want the top one, I've got to spend the resources shown in all 3 boxes. So that's another way. This is kind of like a good end game big point score here to move up here and then also try to grab that 11-point tile. Finally, the last action that you'll do here is just simply purchase a card from the marketplace. Now to start the game, you've got 1 artifact there on the left, and then you've got this sort of staff, which is acting as the round marker, and then you've got 5 items on the right, and those will cost gold. The artifacts will cost time tokens. Now as the rounds move along, you're going to move that round marker, that staff, to the right, and then you'll have, in this case, 2 artifacts and then 4 items. And as we move along through the game, there'll be more artifacts available and less items. And then at the end of the 5th round, that will be the end of the game, and you'll total up your points. Okay, so that's the general overview of the game. You're going to get points in a lot of different ways in this game. You're going to get points moving up the research track, getting those temple tiles, getting the idols. You get points for the artifacts and the items, for the guardians and the monsters that you defeat, and so on. And you lose points for the fear cards if you've got any left in your deck at the end of the game. So let's kind of go through my pillars of review, and then I'll get into a little bit more of the nitty gritty. So first of all, play count and play time, those 2 pillars. I've only had a chance to play this 2-player once, and then I played it about 6 times solo. With the lockdown currently, if you're watching this in real time, everything's pretty much in lockdown due to the COVID. But if you've watched my channel at all, you know I'm not like the biggest fan of these kind of Euro games with this automa kind of weird flip a card, do what it says for the AI kind of thing. It really works here. I really recommend this as a solo game. If you're one of those solo gamers that really loves the solo game style stuff, I recommend this highly, because as somebody that doesn't really get into this, the AI system here is so dead simple. It's like 1 page of rules, and it does things in a way that's not necessarily like, it doesn't seem like it's intelligent, but it does it in a way that makes sense as kind of a thwart to what I'm trying to do. So it basically just kind of gathers points and block spaces for me, and then I still have my game to worry about, and my sort of thought process to worry about. So I really recommend it as a 1-player game. I would recommend it more, actually, with probably more players. I'll talk more about the single player stuff in a minute, but I did enjoy my play of a 2-player. I would expect that I would like it probably even more as a 3- and 4-player game, because your opponents are going to more intelligently block spaces that they can see that you're going after, especially as I think players start to learn the game and start to sort of figure out when each resource has its value, because there's certain things that the arrows are good for and certain things that the tablets are good for. And so they each kind of have their own purpose, which has a nice thematic tie-in. So I do expect actually to like it more with more players, but I will say this, because the playtime on the box says 30 minutes per player. And I 100% think that's accurate, because even playing solo, there is a little bit of analysis paralysis there, because you've got so many different kind of combinations of things that you can do. You've got the multi-use card thing going on, where you're like, okay, I could spend this card for its travel icon, or you know what, maybe I can spend it for its quick action, which will give me like a time token or gold or some other cool thing that one of the items that I bought gives me. And if I do this and I do research, that's going to trigger this, so I can do that. Okay, I'll do that. Let me rewind that and try this other approach out in my head. So there's a lot of that going on. And so I think once you add 4 people at the table doing that, especially as folks are new to the game and trying to figure out sort of the cadence and the timing of everything, then that's going to elicit some AP. So I could definitely see a 4-player game going the full 2 hours, maybe a little bit more, as players are learning the game. Now, as I've played it again, I probably played it a little bit more than half a dozen times. A lot of it solo. I've got my plays down to definitely half an hour, where I can kind of burn through it, and I've got kind of a good idea what's going on now. But I definitely, at the beginning though, when my first few plays, it was like, okay, what am I going to do? This is really hard. It's not making any sense. So once you get into it, it will go faster. So a little caveat there in terms of player count and how many times I've had to play it with the number of players and all that stuff. As far as what is this game like, a couple things come to mind which I didn't really expect, and that they probably won't make a lot of sense until I kind of explain it. So it kind of reminds me of Great Western Trail, and also Marvel Champions, the LCG from Fantasy Flight. So the Great Western Trail part probably makes a little bit more sense, because it's kind of a worker placement deck building game, just like this. but it doesn't feel anything like Great Western Trail, really. I would say the deck building is stronger here. It's a little bit more important, because in Great Western Trail, you're just kind of getting, it's a deck building game, but it's more of a set collecting game where you're trying to collect the different sets of the different values of types of cows to kind of burn through your deck there. So you're managing your deck, but you're not doing all that fun deck building stuff like you will in Dominion, where you're building up and getting combos out of them, which I love. Great Western Trail is like one of my favorite games ever, but it's not really meant to do that. It's more of a worker placement, K-less style game in Great Western Trail, where this is more focused on the deck building, but also more focusing on the intricate combo thing going on. So if you're like less of a Euro person and more of a card game person, even though I don't want to oversell the deck building because it's still pretty discrete and specific and surgical, it's not like you're building a big huge deck in this game at all. But the worker placement stuff and the research track, that kind of combo bits feels deck building. It feels Magic card, you know, that whole vibe, that whole flavor. So it kind of has that feel of that, you know, the last several years, and I feel like we've even kind of have even grown out of that sort of, you know, zeitgeist or whatever of the thing where like we have the hodgepodge Euros. This is kind of almost a throwback to maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago, but really well done and really smartly executed. It doesn't feel like, you know, a rehash or anything like that. So it has that kind of, that vibe with that Great Western Trail and that kind of era of games from a few years ago, but a completely different sensibility. And then the Marvel Champions comparison is because a lot of times when you're in a good game of Marvel Champion, you're like really trying to eke out and squeeze out that last, you know, little juice of a resource to just get you over that hump, and then that combo just lands, just boom, it lands. And so you're trying to really squeeze out that last little something out of the game. And another game that really does that is kind of like Tapestry. If you played Tapestry recently, came out I think last year. Tapestry has that thing too, where you're trying to really, you know, Tapestry is very simple. You just move up one of the tracks, but then you're trying to like do it in such a way just to kind of eke out another turn, eke out another action, eke out another, you know, type of thing. So this has that kind of thing where it's like, if I do that, that'll give me another chance, and I can go after this and get that. Now, what this has to it, and I will say this next comment is probably sounds like a knock, and I think it could be for some people, but it also, there's a certain level of excitement to it. So a lot of times you're trying to, like I said, eke out that action. So you're trying to like, okay, if I can just get that card draw or get that extra thing or get that extra artifact to flop, or you know, screw it, I'm gonna go and explore and hope that I get this thing because I'm like just an arrowhead away, or I'm just like one of these 2 possible resources which will get me up on the research track, which will then trigger this thing, and that's my whole plan will come to fruition. So it seems like sometimes you're kind of trying to like luck into the combo a little bit, and that's gonna happen. And I think especially in the early games, I mean, even in my last couple games, as I've gotten to handle it, there's still that sort of, that weird sort of fuzzy barrier there of luck. And now it's not a lucky game, but it just seems like sometimes I've played it and I've just been like, stuff is just kind of like landing in my lap. And I'm like, you know, other times you're just trying to really eke it out. So I think there's going to be some level of frustration there for players. But I don't really think it, like, to me, that's not a negative sort of projection onto the game or the design or how they put this together. Just something to kind of think about and just kind of like sit with that for a little while if you play this, because I think that could be a frustrating thing. Anyway, so there's that. So the main thing I wanted to kind of get back to is, I recommend the game, especially if you're into solo play, like I said, because for me, again, this is not my style of solo play, and I would recommend this. It's a lot of fun. It's been kind of addictive, actually, the last couple of weeks. The one thing I do like about the solo play is you can scale up the difficulty, because you have 10 sort of tiles that you flip over, and 5 of them are green, and there's kind of 5 neutral ones and then 5 red ones. So you can take out all the green ones and shuffle in the 5 red with the 5 neutral, and that's your like most difficult setting. So you can kind of grow into that. You can just play with the green ones at the beginning. But there's also another side to this board, which I didn't really show you in any of the pictures or anything. And that is definitely a more difficult side. So the biggest change there is the research track is a little bit shuffled up a little bit. and you actually have to spend one of your idols to move up on the research track. And so that's going to kind of hinder that free action thing. So it's hard to explain until you played the game probably a couple times. But trying to beat the hard difficulty AI on the hard board is, I think that's really the good challenge of it. Because even if I increase the difficulty of the hardest AI and play on the easy side of the board, like, I can destroy it now. But I like that I've kind of gradually gotten into that. I wasn't doing that my first play. I would just play against the easy AI, and I was like, okay, I beat this now a couple times. And so then I played against the hard, and I beat it, barely by like 2 points. And then the other day I had like 92 points, and I had 65. And I'm like, I think I got this guy down now. And then I played on the hard board, and I think I lost by like a point or 2 points. So I like that you can kind of scale up that way. But I do think it's going to be better even with real people as an opponent, because they're going to be a little bit more crafty about what they're taking from you and so on. But I recommend it. I think there's a lot to really like about the game in terms of how it's kind of put together. The theme of it really works with the whole like exploration and then revealing it, but then your opponents then can kind of come into that dig site and check it out. So it really kind of feels like you're collectively discovering some just fantasy lost island somewhere, and everybody's kind of getting in on it. And I like how the tie-in works between the research track and the exploration, the discovery, and the digging, and the kind of back and forth there. So mechanically it works really well, because like I said, when you kind of put together those combos, like, well, if I research a little bit, that's going to give me the extra time token, which is what I need to get to the further space or to buy this extra cool artifact. And then once I get that, that's going to kind of tie back, and that's going to help me move up the research track further. So it all kind of works together and works well. It is a little bit of a point salad kind of thing, but not really. Like, your main thrust should be that research track, because that's going to be your big hitting points. Incidentally, you're going to get points from the idols and the guardians. At the end of the game, you might have an engine as such that gives you lots of extra time or lots of extra gold, and you can use actions to kind of buy items and artifacts. That'll give you not a ton of points, but it's going to give you some extra points, so you can do that at the end. And which is just a sidetrack. That's a cool thing that this game really does, is even at the end of the game, you can still add to your deck. Because when you buy an artifact, which I didn't mention, you actually activate that artifact right away before it goes into your deck. The item just goes into your deck, and then you use it on later turns. But you can still buy them at the end of the game for points. But the artifact, you actually get it, and then you get this cool ability, and then when you theoretically dig it out of your deck later, you can spend a tablet to activate it again. So it does cost a little bit more. It costs you an extra resource to even play the card. But the way that kind of works, where the artifact, you get it, and then the items, when you buy them, they just go right on the bottom of your deck. So anything, the way that it works is you don't really like shuffle your deck a lot, is the cards that you just played will get shuffled and put at the bottom of your deck. And so you can kind of guarantee, like, if I buy an artifact this turn, next turn I'm getting to use it, which really is as a cool bit for your planning as well. So the way that they do that and the way all this stuff kind of interacts is really cool. And so the only other thing, almost on the flip side of that, where I'd kind of give it a knock, is it kind of loses its theme just slightly, but I think the mechanics just make up for it by leaps and bounds, because you start to get really like number crunchy and combo crunchy when you play the game. So as you get into like the second, third round, and then it's just my brain's in like full like math AP mode, and I've lost kind of the plot of exploration and fighting guardians and all that kind of stuff. So it almost like it's so like smoothly designed that it's almost like too much of a sharp edge that kind of slices through a little bit of its soul, a little bit. And that's such that's the biggest nitpick in the world. But I do feel that, because at the end of the game, I'm like, oh, it just morphs into points. So some of that might be coming from playing it solo, but it's just if I had to pick some kind of thing that might turn you off from it, it would be a little bit of that frustration with the combo, and it might just kind of nick off a little bit of that sort of fun, trashy side of it that the game really has in a lot of ways. But on the other hand, I mean, the mechanics are just so solid and punchy and just engrossing and addictive, like I said, that I can't not recommend this game. It's just super well produced and polished and refined. So I do kind of hope there is an expansion for this one, because I think there could be just that other little level of kind of jankiness and fun, and kind of getting back to the fun jankiness of it, which is when I first played the game was really neat. I was like, oh, I can do this and go this and this, and then now it's become a little bit number crunchy. But this is definitely one of my favorite games so far this year. Definitely excited to try to play with more people eventually, probably in a year or so. But anyway, definitely recommend take a look at it. And since we're all playing a lot of solo games, hopefully, if you aren't, hopefully this will be a good one that you can try out. So definitely recommend it. Thanks.